So, hi, my name is Andrew Kuhn. I'm the interim vice president for conferences for SIGCHI. And so, as you know, we have a sequence of these, what we hope to be opportunities to hear from the community about various issues that we should be really focusing on. One thing that really brought this up is the this general upheaval regarding social justice that happened very recently. And we realized that, first of all, we need to do our best to make sure that we fight for social justice. And then that one thing that we really want to do first is to listen and to ask what the community thinks and what the community would like to see happen and where the community sees problems that need to be addressed. I should also say that, you know, for me, clearly that's one central issue that we need to discuss. And there are also a whole host of other questions that I'm sure you might have, and I'm looking forward to those in general regarding to conferences and perhaps more broadly to SIGCHI. And if we can answer them right now, great. If not, then we'll take some notes down and come back. So Regan, maybe you can continue.
Sure. Let me just quickly mention that I'm creating a Slido link right now. And so I'm going to share that in the chat. So if there are questions that we don't get to, then we can address them maybe in writing.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm Regan Mandryk and I'm chair of the CHI steering committee. So I've been involved with the CHI community since about 1999. And I was involved with a number of different initiatives along the way to kind of change how CHI handles its review process. So I was subcommittee chair for the first virtual subcommittee that happened in 2016. It wasn't even that long ago. And then we moved from 1 to 3 to 6 and then to the whole thing virtual the following year. I was also the whip chair the year that we decided to move to a junior reviewing committee to try and mentor ACs in our community. So I think I've been involved with like these kinds of initiatives, and then I chaired CHI in 2018. And through that process, I was part of the CHI steering committee there. I really kind of thought more about like, how can I volunteer to, now that I know how this conference works, how can I volunteer to actually do more to help guide the community and listen to the community and how we want to actually improve CHI in particular. And CHI is an interesting one because it is the biggest of our conferences, and every issue that you might think is important at a small conference really just gets blown up at CHI. It's crazy. We have problems with the numbers of papers that are submitted. So the trend of increasing papers, it's an exponential trend of paper submissions, but we have a linear trend of attendees. So that's one thing that we're trying to deal with. How do we handle the scope of reviewing at CHI, maintaining quality across this huge, diverse range of domains and methodologies, from like research through design, through qualitative, quantitative, systems research. It's very challenging across a number of domains, from healthcare to games to accessibility, all these different things. And the other thing that I would like to mention is that our issues at CHI are often related to scale. It's really hard to maintain the quality at CHI. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be trying harder to do that. We have more than 700 papers to present. How do we do that effectively? How are we going to do this as we kind of continue to grow as a community? We have no more time to expand. We're already a 4-day conference with 2 days of workshops. Managing the organization is so challenging that we require professional support, but we're still trying to use volunteers to do a lot of things. And knowledge is quickly obsolete. Like I chaired in 2018, my knowledge is pretty obsolete because things are done differently now, even just 2 years later. And the final thing I think that I would like to hear from people on in general, and not just today, is the value tensions that we experience that I think really come out at CHI. So we value so many different things. We value inclusion and diversity and quality and outreach and interdisciplinarity and all these things, which creates a lot of tensions because there's conflict sometimes between these things and the values themselves. And these trade-offs are not well understood in our community. And some examples that have been kind of out there and brought up before, we have a value of accessibility of our conferences. We also have a value of global outreach. We have a value of climate responsibility, and these all kind of converge in site selection. And these 3 different values create 3 different ideas on where we should go. for site selection. So how do we kind of bring all these in? How do we balance training of our community with being the flagship venue of HCI research? How do we balance registration cost versus the ideas that we have around ethics of sponsorship, data transparency versus privacy? Like there's all these different trade-offs, and CHI's been a bit reactive to these things over the past number of years, as you guys are probably all aware. And we're trying more to be proactive about changing these things. And so a big part of that is listening to the community and, trying to get ahead of some of these value tensions by listening to what the community has to bring to the table. So that's my introduction there. So I guess, Neha, you're not moderating. Okay, so I guess we could start. Go ahead.
I just want to mention that I created the Slido link so people can add questions there, but I do have a list of questions from surveys that people had filled out. We can get to those at some point. Maybe we can take questions from the room right now.
So you can certainly tell us if you'd like to speak up. You can also put questions either in the chat or Slido, and we can read them, whichever is more comfortable.
I guess I have a question. Hi. I wasn't actually planning on asking questions, but Regan, as you were talking, it kind of occurred to me that like the only reason I'm here today is because someone who is currently a SIGCHI member told me. But as it stands right now, I only do my membership to get the cheaper conference fee before I have to go to a conference, to be perfectly honest. And so if we're interested in like the diversity in the community and bringing people in and hearing their issues, like there's limited reach to just the SIGCHI membership. And like I only found out because someone else knew, and so on and so on. So I feel like there might be some bias kind of in what you're hearing back from people who are not members of the community. And I'm wondering if you know off the top of your head how many people who go to CHI are SIGCHI members versus non-members.
I do know this off the top of my head because everyone who goes to CHI is a SIGCHI member, because that's the only people that are SIGCHI members, and a few other people. Cliff, I don't know if you want to actually answer this this is not really a conference question, but it's more of a.
Yeah, hi, I'm Cliff Lampe. I'm the Executive Vice President for SIGCHI and General Chair for CHI 2022. So that's a big question, right? Cayley, you're exactly right. Like the value of membership is something that we've been hotly debating recently. Right now, basically being a member means you get that cheaper registration, but we bundle that into the fee structure for CHI, which is kind of a greasy way of doing things, and we're re-looking at that. The only real benefit you get from membership is that discount and then Interactions magazine, right? And largely the reason we do this, and this is super frank AMA, like I always think the goal of an AMA is to be super frank. The reason we do that is to generate a mailing list so we can try to get a hold of people, right? Like that's our real only value for membership. It's not like we need your $55 to survive. It's that we want to generate a mailing list of who our members are, because it's actually surprisingly difficult to get a hold of everybody. Right? Like, how do we do that? How do we get a hold of everybody who cares about the CHI conference or should care about the CHI conference or has been a SIGCHI member, or, like all of that's a big challenge. And it's something we're actively struggling with. That's not a great answer that we're actively struggling with it, but that's where we're at.
Thank you.
I would add that we have elections coming up next year, and one of the roles on the EC is VP of Membership and Communications. So if someone here, or if you know someone who's passionate about this, or who would like to figure out what does it mean to be a SIGCHI member, like what advantage can there be, or what benefit can there be that we actually people volunteer to be SIGCHI members instead of just doing it as part of their registration. I had to figure out myself, Cayley, I had to figure out recently whether or not I was a SIGCHI member. I know I'm an ACM member, but I actually didn't know. And I'm like, I'm chair of the CHI steering committee. I don't even know if I'm a SIGCHI member. But it's true. And so I would encourage anyone, or if you know someone who's passionate about this, please put your name forward. There's an open call that's going to be coming out very soon. Please put your name forward to volunteer to be VP of Membership and Communications for the SIGCHI EC. That's also not an answer. It's a call for help. Oh, it's already out. Neha posted it. Oh no, that's the adjunct chairs.
This is a danger for both you and I, like kind of being in the channel, Regan, is that we might give too many honest answers to things.
No, honesty all the way. Yeah, I'll be frank. I don't care.
I just posted the open calls that we have currently for adjunct chairs, and a lot of these roles might actually overlap with what you mentioned, Cayley. So if you want to take a look at those. Can I go ahead and ask a question that was in the survey that we rolled out? So let me just keep it anonymous. So this was asking about how ACs are selected. And it says, and no, the answer is not that, quote unquote, we rolled out a nomination form and we chose people from the ones who said yes. This does not help. I know people who've been actively publishing and providing quality reviews for years and they're not being called. Instead, I see people with 1 or 2 Chi papers joining the AC and then being totally disrespectful to other ACs in the room. This is not fair. If we fail to establish fairness at the AC level, we will lose the whole thing because the ACs control the quality of the conference. If someone is selected for representing a particular community, then I understand why we may evaluate their profile differently, but we need to make sure that their presence does not block the path for other quality reviewers or make other ACs upset. So I guess this is a question about selection of the program committee, if you can shed some light on that.
Yeah, this is actually one of my big personal goals with taking on, one of the reasons why I took on this huge volunteer role is because I think that the review, this is my frank thing here, Cliff, I think the review process at Chi is pretty broken. The scale at which we've had to, we have 2,500 full paper submissions that we have to review, that we still send out the vast majority, like almost all of them to external review. And as I mentioned before, you have this like weird range like of methodologies and also domains of expertise. Plus, people that might be very senior, that have a lot of expertise, might not have reviewed for Chi before. So they might be very senior at WIST or at CSCW or at a non-SIG-Chi conference, but not necessarily Chi. When I chaired the thing in 2018, there were 325 people on the program committee. I think last year it was well over 400. And so how do you manage 400 people? How do you manage consistency in interpretation of what's like, across 400 people? I don't think the way that you do that is with a wide open text field for review. I don't think the way you do that is asking people to self-rate their expertise. I don't think the way that you do that is by shoulder tapping individuals to serve on as ACs or as subcommittee chairs. And yet those are all the things that we do right now. It is like something that I really would like to take on, is to really kind of blow up the review process and think about how we could do better. I'm doing this at a smaller conference right now. I literally just had a meeting beforehand to try and see if what we can do, maybe scale it up to Chi, because it is a huge problem and people have a lot of different opinions on what a Chi paper is and what a Chi paper should value. And that's just at Chi. I think that the same thing might be true at some of the other bigger SIG-Chi conferences like CSCW and UBComp and WIST, who have different issues, because no, they don't have any problems, right? No. So I don't know. Does anyone have a particular follow? Yeah, Jim. I know Jim is passionate about this.
So I love CSCW and I love the folks running it. And I think they've done a ton of work over the past probably 10 years. I think they're probably 10 years ahead of Chi in terms of reform in the review process. And so the question that I had is, what have they done right culturally, and how do we make that work elsewhere in SIG-Chi? Because I guess my feeling is that everywhere we go, we're optimizing on this acceptance rate number, which I think just kills, like, I think it's a framing issue with reviews, because you go in knowing that you're rejecting 3/4 of papers rather than trying to look at strengths in papers. And I think that we've inherited that from our CS kind of origin story. And to me, it's just a framing problem with everything that we do that kind of trickles down.
Well, just to add to that, and then maybe I'll throw it to, sorry, Cliff, you didn't realize you're going to be answering questions maybe so much, but being a CSCW recent paper chair, I think, But I think that, you know, moving to the revise and resubmit cycle is something that's really on my mind. It's like I said, I'm going through this for a smaller conference so that I can get some experience. And also, like a lot of people have been through this at CSCW, it's very different at the CHI level. But by doing that, the acceptance rate went way up. But the way that I see it personally is that those are good papers that deserve to be published in our community. And if they weren't accepted, if they were part of the 10% that we say, oh, we don't want to go above 30%. So, you know, if they were part of the 10% that were rejected, they would just get resubmitted because they're good papers and get published at a different SIGCHI conference. So why not publish them at the one that they belong at? So I think that's, from my perspective, that's one of the things that's been done right. Forget about acceptance rates in some sense and accept good papers. And because the quality of the papers has gone up. But maybe Cliff, if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Jim talking about cultural change, that was the big fight in the CSCW community for culture change was, and Jonathan Gruden, I'll give a shout out to him because he really took the lead on that fight. Like there was a moment when Gruden and Kraut were almost at blows over that exact issue. And Gruden he used his famous Gruden stubbornness to force the issue of us re-examining acceptance rate as kind of the end-all be-all metric for conference quality. I'll add a couple things too to what Regan was saying. So the CHI steering committee gave a mandate to CHI 2022, which we're taking on right now, which is that we need to re-examine the committee structure for CHI overall. Like our subcommittee structure is a weird mix of topics and methodologies. And unless you're an insider to CHI, it's almost impossible to navigate which subcommittee you should send your paper to. So the TPCs and the GCs right now are setting up a structure by which we will re-examine the fundamental nature of the program committee at CHI. And we'll be collecting a lot of data about that soon. And then the other mandate that we have is that there will be at least an experiment for CHI 2022 where some CHI papers are going to be published through PACM HCI and have a full revise and resubmit process to start norming that process for CHI.
That's really cool. I guess going back to the CSCW thing, I remember going to, I think it was 2012, there was a 40% acceptance rate. And I remember hearing people mumbling at the conference and complaining. And I think almost the next year, it immediately went back to 25 and it's kind of stuck there. And this year they stopped. I don't think they're reporting it. I don't think they've got any kind of target rate. And so to me, my question is that something that's been community driven or top down or what? Because quite often we're asked to enact both bottom up and top down change at CHI. And I just don't know how that actually works.
I would say that was a top-down choice, but like the community really helped with that. Like, I mean, it helped because the CSCW papers got better, right, with the revise and resubmit process, and people could see that. My own old advisor, Paul Resnick, very dryly said, it's no surprise that if you give people feedback on the paper and let them revise it, the paper gets better. But that's the goal, right, is better scholarship. And once people saw that, the community, the top-down and bottom-up came together pretty nicely.
Thank you.
There's a couple questions that have appeared from Slido. For CHI, is there a move to open up quarterly cycles? No. I think we need to revise our review process first, and then probably that will be the second part of it. I mean, it's not going to happen now. It's for 2021. It's not going to happen for 2022. Maybe after that. But and call for adjunct chairs. Are there any criteria for ideal candidates? Andrew, did you want to address this one, or the three
right? So I'm just trying to think. You know, if the I'm hopeful that the description basically tells people what those are. So you know, as far as the equity chairs, right? I think that there is an understanding on the executive committee that there are broad issues, and I think that we're looking forward to basically this being part of the community feedback in a sense, right? So people will step up with some ideas, and we would like to take advantage of those ideas, people being passionate about something and leading the way. I think Regan, you described this really well, the value tension. And so, which, you know, there are many things we should be addressing, and we're hopeful that as people step forward, they will kind of show us the way, how they think that we should address them. So I hope that this answers the question. I'm not, you know.
And I think,
if someone, go ahead.
To add to that, I just think people who are interested in doing the work to make change. So I think if people are interested in stepping up, that's actually a really huge criteria. That is the ideal candidate, someone who wants and is passionate to actually work to make change. And so in the way that, one of them is the way that we communicate with our community. So Cayley brought up some stuff around this before. One is on accessibility, which has been a huge challenge for us as a big community, and something that we're making progress on, but we still have so far to go. And the other one is on issues around equity. So I think if you're willing to do the work. Any other questions from anyone that's here?
Sorry, Kaveh has his hand raised, so if you want to go ahead and ask.
Yeah, thank you very much. So this is Kaveh speaking from Tehran, and thank you very much for giving me the floor. So I would first like to thank you everyone for providing this opportunity, at least to listen to you, because I've seen your names. Of course, now I know because of the cross-border initiatives. Others, it's the first time I'm seeing the faces. So I have two questions. First of all, I wanted to know what is happening with the SIGCHI International Public Policy Committee. So I'm going to pass that on the chat. And back in 2010, Jonathan Lazar has been commissioned with a report that he produced. But following that, I couldn't trace anything about this public policy. So this is the link that you have in the chat. So I wanted to know whether the subcommittee list of people is up to date, which means that whether the people who are listed as members of the international subcommittee are up to date. And second, what has happened with a follow-up of what Jonathan Lazar has done. And lastly, how come that within CHI there isn't any specific subcommittee for public policy? Because it happens that with everything which is happening around the globe right now, something which is really, really missing is public policy and failure of public policy. So I would be very happy to listen to you. Thank you.
In terms of what's happening with the SIGCHI public policy, Andrew, do you, or Cliff, or Neha, I guess you're all members of the EC, do you?
I must admit, I'm not familiar with this particular.
I'll give the straight poop on it. I guess.
All right, thank you.
So Kaveh, thanks for those questions. And it's a really great point. I think, unfortunately, that the Public Policy Committee is vastly out of date. This was Jonathan Lazar, his passion, of course, was public policy as a research agenda. And he really drove this. And neither this EC nor the previous one has done anything around public policy. And that's a shame, right? Like, I mean, I'm with you. I think public policy is a very important thing and we should be doing that. But this committee entirely is defunct as far as I know. I don't think they've met. And they certainly haven't reported anything to the EC if they have met. So I think there's a real opportunity here to reinvigorate our efforts around public policy in terms of what SIGCHI does. Of course, one of the challenges for SIGCHI is that each EC brings in their own set of priorities, and there's only so many hours in a day to pursue certain priorities. So this is another maybe call to think about the elections coming up and voting for candidates that would prioritize that for you.
And just a follow-up question, do you think that there is, within the global community of HCI, practitioners, researchers, educators, is there still interest in public policy, or it was just, a thing where Gerrit van der Veer, I think, who was the past president of SIGCHI, commissioned to Jonathan Lazar, and as that was his own agenda, he put that forward. And when Gerrit resigned, and I don't know, Jonathan Lazar got his awards and everything stopped, or still the interest is there?
I think there's a group of people definitely interested in public policy, and how they express it can be different. Like, I think the SIGCHI Across Borders has an implicit kind of policy edge that we don't forefront very much. But I do think there's a there are a lot of people interested in public policy implications of CHI. If you look at the work of like what Kate Starbird at the University of Washington is doing, there's a bunch of European scholars who work directly in public policy, but they're not organized right now because I think Jonathan was providing a lot of that organizational effort and his attention moved elsewhere. So I think that group is looking for some leadership.
I can add also that at the ACM level, there's the US Technology Policy Council, and then there's the European Technology Policy Council. And, you know, if it would be useful to connect with them, because there's a lot of activity, I think, at the ACM level, not so much at the SIG level.
Thank you very much for your both responses. I will probably get back to you, Clifford, if I'm right. So maybe you can point me to the right person. Thank you again for your answer. Over and out.
I would also just add there's a couple mechanisms for topics that are of interest if anyone wanted to build a community around it. At the CHI conference, everyone's aware there are SIGs, and these are opportunities to gather around a topic of interest. So proposing a SIG on something that is of interest and trying to rebuild this community would be one mechanism. And then another thing that I'm not quite sure if it's a good fit or not in this particular instance, but would be for other ones, is the VP at large role as we have these elections coming up for the SIGCHI EC next year, who basically kind of bring their own mandate to the table. So they propose to run for a role with a mandate. And so if there's a mandate to you know, whatever it might be, a topic that you're interested in. Right now we have Neha who does community support and Shawan who does a lot of outreach and equity. So bring your own mandate kind of to the role of the EC. So that's another opportunity, I think.
Thank you, Regan.
There is a question on the chat. So I'll answer that one, or I'll ask it. What are the thoughts within SIGCHI EC about sites of future CHI conferences beyond 2022? Is it shifting in view of the current situation? I'm assuming current situation refers to the global pandemic we find ourselves in. Okay, so I need to do a blog post on site selection at some point because it is complicated. So what we have is for CHI we have a site selection director who is Philippe Planck right now. The CHI steering committee works to put out bids to cities. We have a vision of where we want to go based on a bunch of values. We put out bids to cities. We get the bids back. We evaluate them. We organize site visits at a few cities. And then we vote as the steering committee. We take that to the executive committee who then vote as well. And there's a bunch of votes that happen along this process. This all happens about 4 years in advance, 4 to 5 years in advance of a conference. So we already have contracts signed for 2023. And we've done work for 2024, which has been interrupted by the global pandemic situation. So it does happen quite far in advance, but not so far in advance that we have our selection of dates. So we are a very large conference with very unique, in the terms of the conference world, we have very unique requirements for who can host us. So when you think about it, we have a need for 22, 23 parallel paper session rooms that have to accommodate about 500 people each for about 4 to 5 of them. We have a need for the other rooms, courses, SIGs, those kinds of things. We have a need for a large exhibit hall where we can host interactivity posters, all that kind of stuff. And then we have a need for a range of hotel prices that are walkable and nearby. And so that's actually very challenging from a venue perspective. A lot of really big conferences don't have this need for parallel paper rooms, and a lot of academic venues don't have this need for an exhibit hall. So we have a kind of a weird situation. We have a bit of trouble sometimes because we are not doing this even more in advance. But if we do it more in advance, then of course we are going to have we're going to be less flexible with how we adapt the conference to the changing community needs. So in terms of the near future, we are working on signing contracts right now in 2023. We're doing our site selection. We've done our preliminary things. We're working on visits for 2024. Our goal with 2025 is to, we have a rotating selection of regions. So we go East Coast, US, Europe, no, West Coast, US, Asia. Wildcard. That's sort of the rotation. And there's reasons for that, mostly, well, I can get into that if anyone actually cares, but that is the rotation that we go through. And so our wildcard year is 2025. And we are very much thinking about going to a region of the world that we haven't been to before to engage that population of HCI scholars. So that would look like something like something that's not North America, not Europe, and not East Asia, basically would be the criterion. In terms of what we're doing, we don't know what's happening. We're planning for hybrid models. That's how we're dealing with the global pandemic. We're planning for hybrid models moving forward, which is a good thing for our community to do anyways. So we're planning for physical conferences in 2023 and in the future, but also really working on virtualization approaches. So how do we support virtual attendance and support conference attendance, both at the event itself and kind of bringing the conference to the community kind of 365 days a year. That's from the CHI perspective. Andrew, for the other SIGCHI conferences, maybe you could speak to that.
Well, as far as, as far as sites go, yes. So I would hope, one hope that I have is that, first of all, we can get back to physical conferences because clearly we love them and we miss them. At the same time, I think we're also learning that the virtual version of conferences can work under some circumstances and for some goals. So my hope is that we do, in fact, are able to combine the two in some way. With the realization that I think Cliff pointed this out at some point, it's hard, right? I mean, those are actually two separate conferences in a sense, and then making them actually mesh together is even harder. So having one physical conference and then having some virtual components to it, it's almost like running two separate conferences with the added complication of having to mesh them together well. So I'm hopeful that we can maybe make some headway as we learn from each of our smaller conferences, and then I don't know, we'll see what happens with CHI, right? And then move forward with that. As far as the site selection in particular, those are things that happen on the steering committee level. So steering committees will have different versions of this, but most of the time it's a call for proposals. So for example, I'm involved in automotive UI where I'm the steering committee co-chair now, and we'll have a call for proposals, and then we evaluate proposals based on a set of criteria such as, reviewing the proposal in terms of, completeness and prices and where exactly the place, which place we're shooting for so that we can reach out to different communities, just like Regan pointed out.
I hope if we didn't answer your question, please feel free to follow up.
Yeah, please do.
No, that's it. I just was wondering what were the thoughts on that. It's difficult to predict because we don't know how the situation is evolving. But yeah, it's just nice to see what the EC is thinking at the moment while you're looking at 2023. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and I should note 2021 is working very hard on hybrid options from physical attendance to fully virtual and everything in between. 2022, it's on their radar as well, obviously. No, they're just canceling. Going to a journal model and moving forward as well.
Majir, though, one thing that's worth mentioning is that, one thing I think we've learned certainly is that things change incredibly quickly when things start changing. And so yeah. I think that's one of those things that we learned this year where, we would be thinking about a conference and whether they could potentially have a physical presence one day, and by the next day, literally, it was, why are you even considering this? You people are fools. So I think one thing we learned is that we really need to be careful and thoughtful and realize that there could be changes. So I think we need to be ready for those changes.
There's a whole discussion on the chat about opting out of membership, and I wanted to clarify one thing. That is when the only time you get registered for SIGCHI membership is at the CHI conference. The other discounted rates for conferences are ACM membership. So ACM membership is not the same as SIGCHI membership. ACM membership is $20 for students, and it's I think it's $99 maybe for me. That's different than SIGCHI membership, which is where a lot of the confusion comes from. Are you an ACM member or a SIGCHI member? And this is true. So you can opt out of SIGCHI membership because you're not asked to register for that when you register for a discounted conference rate. But I do get the question with ACM membership. There's not really, you either pay the extra or you are a member. Those are kind of the options right now.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we're thinking about doing is like, what does it mean to even be a SIG member, right? Like, what if we blew up SIG membership and you only were an ACM member? What do we gain or lose from that? We've had these conversations for a few years. Like I was in this interminable meeting one time where we were talking about other SIG-Chi member benefits we could put in place, like, you know, luggage tags and decreased auto insurance. I don't know, like whatever. Like there's a whole bunch of crazy plans. And at the end of the day, like it might be worth it just to consider like what is the overall value of the SIG membership. But that's a bigger, longer term kind of effort. Yes, good point, Neha. We're stealing the VP memberships thunder as we're.
Other questions?
Sorry, I'm not sure what the, oh, there's a background microphone noise, I guess. So if you're not speaking, maybe mute yourself. So there was another question on the survey, which was about, again, I mean, maybe this is connected to what you said about the AC selection, but in general about leadership roles. And so Cliff, I wonder if you can maybe talk a little bit about the open calls that you had. I don't know if it's closed now, but the calls that you did for CHI 2022.
Yeah, I'm closing them tomorrow or tonight, later on tonight, my time. So yeah, the goals for those for the CHI 2022 open call positions is we're responding to some of the requests for representation by more diverse groups of people within the SIGCHI community and leadership roles in the conference. And one of the things we do find is that, you know, if you don't know the people, there's so much social capital that is integral to how CHI and SIGCHI operate, right? You get tapped to be an AC because of who you know. And that creates a lot of, I think, disparities, because if you're in an institution that doesn't have a strong HCI program and you're the only HCI researcher, or you're distant from other HCI researchers, it can create a lot of inequity about who gets a seat at the table in terms of volunteer positions. So we've done open calls for a long time with SIGCHI, in this EC at least, and we wanted to extend that to see what would happen with the CHI conference. And then I've been working with our executive team, which include myself, Simone Barbosa, the two technical program chairs, and our diversity and equity chair, about a rubric for how we assess those, right? And you know, it's been interesting so far. We have over 200 volunteers for positions for the CHI organizing committee from that open call, across a wide variety of places. Like in terms of an initial glance, do we meet the goal of getting a more diverse group of people to volunteer for the conference? Absolutely, right? And now the next thing we want to make sure is that we didn't do this hollowly, right? Like we don't want to fall victim to a process where we have an open call for appearance sake and then we're only selecting basically our friends again. So this past week, the executive team and I have been working on a rubric by which we ensure that we're not doing that to that extent, and have a way that we're assessing people and giving people opportunities that account both for individual excellence, but also for the composition of the entire team.
And you know, I wanted to also go back to maybe that question about the ideal candidate criteria, and I just want to make sure that it's clear that we're not trying to select friends. So if you're considering applying, and don't be held back by maybe not quite understanding what you think might be the ideal candidate. I think Regan said it very well, that we're really looking forward to people who are excited about a particular topic in that realm and ready to move forward. So tell us why you'd fit in well, and I really would like to encourage you to apply. So please don't. I don't know if that question was answered in the best possible way, but I don't want the answer to be like, oh, they didn't tell me what the ideal candidate is. Maybe that's because they don't really, they already have someone figured out. So that's definitely not the case. It's very much something that we're looking for people to apply.
Are there other questions from people who are attending?
Why are the snacks always so bad at the Chi conference? Why can't you guys get good food there? Why is that so hard?
My
So you know
internet
what?
connection's really bad right now. I'm sorry I missed all that, but.
May I ask a question?
Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah. So I was wondering, why is that on the SIGCHI website, there are no statistics, country-wise statistics about ACM SIGCHI members, and that should be updated like each year. And I've been communicating with someone called Pejman Mirza Babai, who is somehow responsible for, I don't know, the membership at large. Never get a response. So I'm wondering, is there specific, I don't know, data ethics problems for sharing those statistics? Perhaps you could just drill down and so see how many SIGCHI members, active SIGCHI members exist in Indonesia. Now there are more than, I think, 55 chapters, both student chapters and professional chapters out there. And there has been a steady growth of chapters worldwide. Why is that nobody is sharing anything about the numbers of members? Thank you.
That's a good question, and I guess I'm going to say that I don't quite know the answer, but what we can do is look into that and find out.
Thank you.
I just yeah, thanks, Kaveh. And actually, you raised this question before in one of our committee meetings, and I did actually go back and check with Pejman. So Pejman used to be the VP Comms. He was interim VP Comms before Regina joined back in her VP Comms position. So that was a few months ago. And he, for some reason, had not received your email. So I don't know if there was a disconnect or there was an incorrect email or something that happened. But to your larger question, which is about membership in general, I think that that's a really great question. And we should try to have that information up on our website. So I can take that as feedback. And this is also maybe a question for VP Comms. So maybe she would actually be able to present that information in the AMA that she does. That might be something that we can ask her for.
Thank you.
There's a question about this wild card, about the conference selection for Chi, right?
Does the choice in wildcard conference location look at membership information? Well, again, membership information is complicated and kind of right now a bit not meaningful, but yes is kind of the answer, I think, to the question that you're looking to ask. And in the sense that we are looking at the HCI communities in those areas and who is active and who is underrepresented in terms of having conferences in there. We wouldn't go to a location that doesn't have an active HCI community. That just wouldn't be something that we would prioritize, given that there's so many places where people haven't been able to host a conference, where there are really active communities. And that's done not so much through membership, but through chapters. So Eunice is the VP for chapters on the SIGCHI Executive Committee. And so chapters was just discussed a little bit in response to Kaveh's question. And so we would be looking at, we're only looking at really at locations where there are active HCI communities. Now, having said that, we actually narrowed it down to, I think, a list of, 7 cities that had facilities even that could host us. So as mentioned before, like we're a strange conference in terms of what our requirements are for needing both an exhibit hall and like 30 parallel rooms for all the things that we have going on, and enough hotels. So we have about, I think there are only about 7 cities that we looked at that have the facilities to host us in a number of different countries. But yeah, we would be looking at chapters. Active chapters would be something that we would very much like to have at any location that we actually go to.
I would add too that having served on both the SC and the EC, the wild card position for the conference is often aspirational. Like we have talked, for instance, about like, you know, we would love for someday for there to be a CHI that takes place in Africa, on the continent of Africa somewhere. We would love for a CHI that takes place in India. We would love for a CHI that takes place in South America, right? And absent the kind of facilities problems that we then dump on Regan's head, like, you know, the wildcard positions for that too, to allow us to, even if there's not like, you know, as many HCI scholars in Africa as there might be in Europe, like it's still, there's a value to us placing the conference there so we can build the community. And that's also a goal of the wildcard position.
I think when I mentioned that, when I mentioned that there has to be an HCI community there, that would be, I think I was trying to, what I was trying to say, and I should just be frank, is that we're not going to choose a place that's just a destination. So we wouldn't want to choose a place that's just a destination that has no, but there are active HCI researchers all over the world. And so this is not really generally a problem, but we're not looking to go to a wildcard location that's like a vacation destination. That's not one of our goals. All right, Jim, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the diversity discussion and just recruiting. Well, I think that's a really great feels third rail. I guess diversifying ACs, SCs, and the folks who are actually involved with the gatekeeping in terms of what's accepted at the conference.
You cut out there until you said ACs and SCs for me.
Yeah, sorry, my internet, it gave me an error message. The question was, it feels like there's a lot of willpower right now to look at diversity in terms of organizational structure, but not so much on the review side of things. So when we start looking at ACs and SCs and even just ensuring that we've got a diverse set of reviewers on each paper. And I just say this coming from a committee meeting a month or two ago where, you know, one of the ACs kind of said to me in an aside that this paper was really evaluated by a manel, and, you know, is that appropriate or not? And I feel like we just don't really have a lot of tools, and I feel like as soon as we start talking about diversity or equity in the review process, it's trumped by this acceptance rate or perceptions that that's going to impact quality of papers.
So that's a really good comment and also question. I'm not sure I agree with the last part that it's trumped by acceptance rate. I don't think that's the attitude of the steering committee anyways. I think what it's trumped by are, or not trumped by, I think what kind of the barriers are that it's super freaking hard. Like it's really hard to think about how we're going to do this at scale. How do we do this with like 2,800 papers? How do we ensure that? We can't even get quality reviews for 2,800 papers right now. Never mind worry about, you know, and I think, I don't think that there's an attitude on the SC, at least. I would say that there's not an attitude that diversity reduces quality. That's definitely not a kind of a thing that the SC holds. Now, of course, having said that, as you know, with CHI, it's like the SC can have a certain goal or mandate, but then there's the conference organizers, and then there's the papers chairs and the team of people with the papers chairs. So there's an entire range of people, and that this kind of has to go through. To be really honest, I think that the problems with the review process that exist don't get solved because the people that care are not as noisy as the people who care about other issues. There are lots of things that we need to fix at CHI. I'm just gonna say CHI because that's the one I'm responsible for, right? But there are so many things that we need to fix. But you don't see a sit-in about review process. You know, people complain, they write letters sometimes. I would say that you're one of the loudest voices in this regard. And I think that because we are being reactive sometimes to the community, we're dealing and moving forward and making progress on issues where there is a group of people or that are being quite vocal about the need for change. And so that's just like completely frank. And it's like, it's because it's a volunteer organization, we only have so much time. So we've made great progress on accessibility due to like the community of accessibility, people who have been very loud, very pushy, very proactive in terms of trying to make change. Those people have been like extraordinary in terms of being organized for change. The same is true, I think, I would say, around a lot of issues around equity. which we're still working on. Obviously, like there was just a a big recent issue that was around race that happened. But I mean, back to 2018 with big outcry around what I call Ruddergate. But which I have to take full responsibility for. And I think that there are a lot of because that was the people were so organized and so clear about what the problems were and what the changes need to be as a result of those problems, that we're able to make progress. And I don't think that we have the same thing going on with the review. I actually care. I actually care a lot about review. And I planned this summit thing, which some of you know about, to try and deal with this. Like I got money to plan this thing, which got canceled because of COVID. But I think that that's why, honestly, I think that's why, because we're reacting to groups of people who are organized and vocal.
I totally agree. And I just wanted to clarify, like, my experience is the ACs and the SCs are all on the same side. Like they want to see better diversity. They want to see more equity at the conference. And it just feels like nobody's in a position to actually do anything about it. And that's kind of the frustrating piece.
There are people who are in a position to do something about it, but there's a disconnect there's a disconnect there.
And this is something Regan and I could talk about for hours and have talked about for hours, right? Like I am fully of the view that if you don't have quality reviews, nothing else we do matters, right? Like it is the basis of belief in the quality of our scholarship. And that's a challenge at scale. When we need 7,500 reviews assuring like qualities, and that's just for papers. That doesn't even get into, you need quality reviews for kind of the non-archival portions of the CHI program as well. There's a challenge. And so we've talked about a whole bunch of possible solutions to some of those problems that we've seen on CHI Meta recently, right? Like, so we could limit submissions, but that's unfair to a certain group of people. We could offer more desk rejects, but that gives too much power into the hands of these ACs in a certain way. We could, try to broaden our pool of people, but every time we go outside of the kind of CHI audience, we find that review quality does suffer, depending on like if they're outside of our field, not so much in any other way. So it's such a challenge for how we actually deal with the scale and scope of CHI and how it grows by roughly 8% in submissions every year. But our reviewing pool doesn't grow in 8% every year. And that's at some point, that's a brick wall that we're going to hit. Cayley makes a really great point that part of this is training too, right? Which is why I was so excited about Regan's kind of summit that she was doing, and why like figuring out how we can actually train reviewers and ACs, frankly, to do a better job is such a big part of this. Like as an AC, I always had the confidence to tell my reviewers they were doing a bad job, right? Like if a reviewer turned in a bad review to me as an AC, I'd always be like, do it again. But it turns out not every AC feels that way. In fact, most don't. So how do we help our ACs feel empowered and feel like they're shepherding the process? It's a big challenge.
Thank you.
I want to step in actually and quickly just say that I'm as one of the subcommittee co-chairs for next year, we've been talking about how to produce these resources, Cayley, that you mentioned. So maybe template emails that would have certain kind of boilerplate text, but then people could kind of insert other text about the reviews in particular, and also keep reiterating the message that we want people to be mindful of things like, comments about native English speakers or comments about where the research was done. Like all of these can be really offensive and hurtful, and they can turn away people from the community. And we do definitely want to build more and more awareness around those. So these are conversations that I assure you that we're having. Now, again, the question of scaling them up, that is the challenge. But if you have any other suggestions that you want to, send our way, we can share them with the papers chairs at least.
I think this is the challenge though. Like you as a subcommittee chair know about this problem and are talking about this problem. You might share it with your papers chair. The steering committee is talking about this problem. ACs, like I think everyone understands this, but it's not really coordinated. And this is, I think a lot of things that happen in CHI in particular are like, because the buck stops with whom in the end? Like who's responsible? Is it, yeah, I see Cliff pointing at the camera. But really, because there's the organizing committee, there's the steering committee, there's the EC, there's the individual ACs, there's the SCs, and it's really hard, I think. And the fact that it's really hard shouldn't really be stopping us. Last point I wanted to make on this, VP at large for review, I don't know, quality, review upheaval, review blow it all up and start over again.
Yeah, mentorship is the other thing that you mentioned, which is, I guess, reviewer mentoring, but also mentorship in general. We have 5 minutes. One thing that I did want us to cover maybe in this call was just a point that came up in an email earlier, was how to do these AMAs. So do you think that this is a format that worked for you? Do you have any suggestions on how to do this differently? Because we'll be doing them once a week with the different. You can just put it in the chat or put it in Slido.
And also, yeah, that's a really good question, and suggestions for channels to listen are definitely welcome. So, you know, could we do this particular thing differently? But also, what else would you suggest that we try to do?
So next week's AMA will be myself, that's VP at large, looking at community support, and then Shawan Barzel, also VP at large, looking at equity and inclusion issues, and then SIGCHI cares in particular. But as you noticed, we also, I mean, there's room to ask more general questions as well, and it's likely that 1 or 2 other AC members will also be present. So yes, let other people know if they had questions, if they missed this one. Sorry, there's an emergency vehicle outside.
Atlanta, man.
Yeah, I mean, this is my life, but I try to mute it for the most part. Anyway, if you have general questions or other people have general questions that they weren't able to ask us in this session, then please let them know that they're welcome to ask, you know, CHI specific or conference specific questions in the future as well. That's all I wanted to add. Actually, Angelica's question about how long will they go on? Well, so we're definitely doing at least 1 per member. We haven't talked about, or 1 per member of the EC. We haven't talked about how we want to sustain them, but maybe once we're done, we could start again in a month or 2. We haven't really thought about it. If you have suggestions, we're open to them. Certainly, if people are showing up, then I think we should be doing these more regularly. And the drop-in office hour, yeah, that's something that we also talked about. That sounds like a great idea. Yeah.
It was Neha's idea, and that's why she thinks it's a great idea, but that we actually have office hours, yeah. I think I was on the other side. I was like, I don't even have office hours for school, so what? But I like that.
We were talking about how many people actually show up in our office hours. So yeah.
And this is recorded, so sorry, the question about minutes, so it's actually, this recording will be online, correct, Neha?
The recording will be, I think if we can write something up, summarize what we talked about, that might be nice. I don't know. I don't know if that's going to take a year though. Yeah. We'll share the recording for sure. Oh, that would be great. Cayley, can I touch base with you after this call then?
For sure. I'm a serial note taker, so.
That sounds amazing. I will, if you can just put your email here, then I will touch base with you. Okay, great. Any last minute questions? Because we're at our last minute. Okay.
Thanks everyone for showing up.
Thank you to everyone.
We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.